Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last RADTECH Europe webinar educational webinar of this week. We've already had 3 this week, and this is our last one. Today we're gonna talk about markets, and we have Paul Kelly, our RADTECH Europe president, with us to tell you more about this topic. And before we start off, I just quickly want to tell you that we are recording this webinar as well, so you can always listen back to it on the RADTECH Europe website. And if you have any questions, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will handle all the questions at the end of the webinar. So now I will hand over to Paul for his presentation.
Thank you, Elke. The first thing I have to do, I think, is I have to start with an admission of guilt. We just, between Elke and I, we just had a bit of a problem with a technical issue. So we only just got this on the screen the way it should be. It's my fault. So I apologize for that. Hopefully everything goes well from here. Yeah, my name is Paul Kelly. I'm currently president of RADTECH, and today's webinar, as part of the educational series, is going to cover the topic of RADCure markets. So I'm going to say a few things and broken up into a number of categories, and hopefully it will be informative. I'm not going to do the usual thing, which is just to present a lot of figures about the market size, etc., and how many materials are used in every area, although I will mention that. What I really want to look at is, how does the market work? In other words, who are the stakeholders in the market? How does the market work for each stakeholder? What information is necessary to really understand the market? So the agenda today, in that case, is broken into these sections. There's going to be a brief market description and overview. This is a bit more like the traditional type of presentation we make at the conference. I'm going to use figures which have been previously used. They may not even be the latest, but they give an indication of the rough market size. The figures I've chosen are actually chosen specifically because it's just pre-COVID. And so the indication is a little bit more stable, if you like. The second part of what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to talk about the actual value chain, the market chain, or value stream, as some call it. In other words, the flow of materials through, in the industry, the flow from basic raw materials through to stakeholders who are at the end of the value chain, maybe consumers, maybe brand owners. And in these days of cyclic economies, circular economies, it feeds back in, and some of the things that end up at the one end of the chain get fed back in again at the other. So that's the second part. And I want to talk about how it relates directly to our industry. And there's a few definitions I'll make along the way, which is about exactly what our industry is, and it will refer back to what RADTECH Europe is a little bit. And then the last and third part is I'm going to focus on an example. I'm going to choose an example. In this case, it's going to be food packaging cartons. And we're going to take a little bit more of an in-depth look at how the market works with relation to one particular application for RADCure materials. Okay, so here we go on the beginning, which is the market description and overview. This is the traditional presentation, and if we speak about the RADCure market as it was in 2019, just before COVID, global volume estimated to about 653,000 tons. And you can see the distribution in the 3 main active regions in the world, in the USA or North America, Europe and Asia. And there's an indication there as well of the growth rate associated with each part of the world. One thing you will notice when you consider figures from 2016 to 2019 is that in every region there is growth. So the UV and RADCure market is growing, and if I could quote something I like to quote, it has never not grown since the beginning of this technology, and you can trace that back to the mid-70s when the first materials appeared. I got involved in this market in 1981, and I've never yet seen a year of negative growth, even through financial crisis, etc. Overall, there was always growth. It's been smaller or larger. It's been anything from about an average of 2 or 3%, and it's been up to 10%. Okay, so let's move along and look at the way the technology splits up with UV curing. The technology split is still predominantly with 100% UV EB materials, that is solvent-free liquid materials, which are all reactive or can be reactive with a photoinitiator. Nominally 100% that solids, that is that there's nothing diluting it other than what will react. And the second part of that is solvent-borne UV. Now, there's a large part of the world, for example, in Asia, where spray applied UV is very, very strong, and solvents are used as carriers in the spray process for a lot of plastics, and you'll see that that's quite a large proportion as well. Water-based, replacing the solvent, has been growing over a number of years. And more recently, there's been a little bit of a growth of UV powders. So you can see there that the way the technology is split hasn't changed actually over some years. Let's look now at considering that by applications. So we said that the volume estimated 2019 was 653,000 tons. And there's a certain difficulty in presenting this type of slide now, where various market surveys collect information in different ways. And it's the thing about interpreting market surveys is to understand how they've asked their questions and how they've divided what they report. So for example, you can see there that we have inks at 11% and OPVs, or sorry, overprint lacquers, which are both used in the graphic arts industry and are quite a large proportion, over 30% together. Some market surveys separate the overprint lacquers and put them with industrial coatings. Some market surveys will include them with inks. And so you get an apparent disparity between market surveys. You see even stranger things happen when the survey focuses on things like passive materials. So for example, you may see that a comparison of the raw materials fed into RADCure applications is not the same as the formulated products. Obviously there's pigments, etc., but there's also a lot of passive resins and resins which probably normally would be used in other areas. So you have to be able to take these figures with a little bit of a pinch of salt. The same is true of the breakup. As I said before, that there's variation between the regions. You'll notice that each region has a sort of traditional sort of strength that they focus on, or which predominates. In the North America, graphic arts is the strongest application area. In Europe, you could say industrial coatings, mainly wood coatings, but plenty of others as well. And in Asia, the growth of applications associated with electronics and devices and such like. It's not to say that all regions don't do everything, they do. Right, so taking that thought a little bit further, our association, RADTECH Europe, is actually called the European Association for UV-EB Curing Technology. And right from the start, when the association was set up, the idea was that it would be an association to promote the use of radiation curing, EB and UV curing, into whatever application was possible. So it's worth remembering that RADTECH is not a technology, is a technology, it's not an application. And that thought then is what I want to take into this presentation of the market. We have to consider that we've been quite successful in promoting not just RADTECH Europe, but the industry, that is everybody is associated with RADTECH, has been very successful. And they have managed to find a niche in a multitude of applications, sometimes replacing technologies that were there before, sometimes being forced by regulations, so VOCs, for example, and sometimes facilitating an application which could never have existed if it wasn't for UV curing. So some of the methods of 3D additive technologies, for example, could not exist if there was no UV curing. Excuse my voice, I'm going to have a quick drink. Thank you. So let's think about this. The biggest, as we saw from those earlier graphs, are in print and packaging, that is the graphic arts, and in wood coatings. They account for roughly 80% of all the applications for RADCure. But even within those, if we consider printing, for example, traditionally there was litho, offset, there was screen, there was flexo, there was gravure, and UV curing, RADCure has made inroads in all of those. But these days now, there's new technologies like digital printing, for example, and UV technology has allowed that to work in ways that, again, wouldn't have been possible with only water-based or solvent-based. Always it will be a little bit of a competition between the technologies, but there's niches, I suppose you could say, that are being carved because of the way it works. But these are only just a couple of the applications, and if we consider other applications where RADCure is used, you have solar panels, for example. These are light guides. These are the adhesives that hold things together. You have screens, I mean, for mobile phones, etc. Again, the light guides and the protective coatings on screens. Mobile phones, some of the adhesives, the protective coatings on plastic parts, auto interiors, plastics for wood, etc. And I could keep on going through these things: electrical resists, household appliances, bumpers, building plastics, mirror housings, optical media, skis, cosmetic packaging, lenses, Fresnel lenses, that type of thing, helmets, crash helmet protective coatings, dashboards, headlights, PVC floors, food packaging, which is something we'll talk about in a little while. Additive technologies, a fairly new thing, but growing very fast. Wooden flooring, inks, all types of inks in different various guises, furniture, adhesives, and many, many more. And so the problem we've got when we consider the market for UV curing materials is that you have to consider a value chain and a value stream for each of these applications, and they may all be very different. From the point of view of some of the raw material manufacturers, they will sell raw materials which could be common to all of those things or none. But this takes us to the next part of the presentation, which is what is the market value chain and how does it relate to our industry? The value chain is pretty obvious. It's just a term coined to show how something moves from the factory to the consumer. Or if it doesn't get as far as the consumer, whoever it is at one end compared to the other end. And the value chain is just an easy way to express that. You could say that actually you have to start before the factory, and it's things that are dug out of the earth or are made from oil or vegetable matter. And so there's a very fundamental part of that. Also, there are other ways to refer to this, and sometimes the terminology used relates to a value stream where you could consider the flow from the factory or the upstream parts of the market down again to the consumer and the stakeholders at the end of the value chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to consider how this now relates to our industry. And by the time we get to consider our example, we're going to look in a very focused way in quite a lot of detail at the way that we can consider a value chain for our industry. So taking that basic idea that you move from raw material supplier through to the formulator, to the manufacturer, to the end user, and on down to the consumer, you have an upstream element and you have a downstream element. In an ideal world, the value chain is simple, well connected, and holistic. In other words, all of the parts understand each other and are well connected so that end users and brand owners understand raw materials and raw material suppliers understand end users. If the value chain was simple, that would be true. But unfortunately, a lot of the times it isn't. And stakeholders in a value chain typically understand the parts either side of them far better than they understand the overall view of the whole value chain. So a holistic view of the value chain is lost a little bit, and sometimes the motivation for a request from a stakeholder can be difficult to understand. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to try and make sure that we could understand why it is that certain stakeholders act in certain ways, who is influencing them, and why do they move in certain ways. I, some years ago, went out and I deliberately set out to visit raw material suppliers, formulators. I was looking at an ink application, so I looked at printers, I looked at packaging manufacturers, fabricators, I looked at supermarket. And I deliberately paid visits to all of these people, and I asked them a set of questions to find out how they viewed the value chain, where their opportunities in the value chain lay, how they interacted typically, and who they thought was causing, or what problems they thought they had with the value chain, what was causing them their day-to-day problems. And typically the answers came back that everybody blames the people either side of them in the value chain. Which is a little bit unfair, but understandable, because these are the people that that every stakeholder will deal with. So for our industry, and with so many different applications and end users, it's important to understand who the stakeholders are and how they influence each other. So we need to consider how the value chain varies for each application. Is it the same? Do raw materials feed through to the end user in the same way every time? So what I thought there is just give a quick indication before we move to our example. If you consider the consumer wants to buy a car or they want to buy some flooring. I have to apologize for this slide. I realized after I've made it that I've done everything in reverse. So the upstream is at the bottom and the downstream is at the top. So I apologize for that. Okay, so let's put a sort of a rough idea of a value chain into that. We'll start with the consumer. Where do they go when they want to buy what they want? They want a new car or they want wooden floor. If it's a new car, they go to a car showroom. They go to a brand owner who runs the showroom, and the showrooms are owned and managed by the brand owners. If they want a wooden floor, they have a number of different options. They could go DIY and go to a bricko or a home Home Depot, that type of store, and they could buy their floor and they could take it home and fit it themselves. Or they might approach a local fitter who is a tradesman, for example, who can fit that floor for them. And that tradesman then will source the flooring, and he will then fit it for the customer. And there's a third possibility with the floor as well. It could be that the consumer is actually a local authority or a hospital or some such place, you know, a theatre where it's a public space and it's the local authority who's looking to fill that space. And they won't necessarily go to the same trade stores and fitters, although they will have to go to someone. So then you go back down the line. So the new car, everything is controlled by the auto company, and they're in big groups. So everything that goes into it, then they can control the engines, the upholstery, the plastic parts, lights, etc. And as you saw on our map of the different applications, Radcure is involved in a lot of those things for hubcaps, for bumpers, for mirrors, for the internal upholstery, for the wooden parts inside, for dashboards. And it's the same with the wooden floor, but in this case, the brand owners are selling through a different route. So the brand owners now, they have control over the bottom, which is the upstream part of the value chain. In this case, as I've drawn it, the bottom parts, where you have formulators who are making coatings and adhesives. They may not be the same formulators, but they are acting in the same way on either side. So they're feeding into those two requirements. And then as you go further up, you have the raw material suppliers. And as I said a moment ago, it could be that the raw material suppliers are supplying the same materials in some cases, some monomers and oligomers, for example, that we use in Radcure. So if HDDA is the monomer of choice, it could be used in the floor coating, it could be used in a car coating, and it doesn't matter too much to the raw material supplier which way it goes. They need to understand sometimes to try and promote or develop things to make it improved, but they'll get that message sent down the value or up the value stream towards them. And then there's truly raw material suppliers. These are the guys who actually deal with the stuff that comes from the refineries, comes from the mining activities, or the vegetable harvesting to promote materials. So you can see that every single application has its own requirements and is complicated in its own way. So that moves us on now to a look at an example. What we tried to do, we decided we were going to focus on one particular application. As RADTECH, we thought we'd love to do this, map out the market for every single application we could think of. But this is a massive task, and we didn't think we stood a chance of doing that all in one go. So we started out choosing one, and we decided to choose food packaging cartons. It is our ambition to go further and look at some more. So food packaging cartons, it's a nice one to choose because you have a link from consumers in supermarkets, brand owners who function in different ways, all the way through. There's no complicated alternative routes in the same way that, for example, the flooring market is. So what we did, we decided to set out, having chosen our application, we decided to set out mapping the market. Now, this is where I had my technical glitches earlier, so I'm going to try and do this. But what we designed was an HTML document that would work from our website, which would be an interactive document and would show how all of the different stakeholders would interact. It would show the flow of materials through the value chain. And it would show the lines of influence, how different parts of the value chain are influencing each other. And there are some interesting parts in this, in that there are influencers who are outside of the value chain actually, but influence what people inside it do. What I would like, if we can do this as we head towards the questions at the end of this presentation, I would very much like it if we could open up the chat, for example, for anyone to add in a little bit of a suggestion where they think, well, 3 questions, I suppose. 1, is this a useful approach? Is it something that they would consult? Wait till you see it before you judge. 2, is this something that could then be developed for other applications after food packaging? And 3 rather, can't count, that's always been my problem for the whole life. 3 is, would anyone who's on the call, on the webinar, would they be interested to get involved? Because obviously the way RADTECH works is we're a membership organization, and if we can develop this and have a wide spread of people who may be on this webinar who have some interest as a stakeholder or some influence, perhaps we could bring them together and we could try and improve the way that we make the whole value chain in that way more holistic. In other words, we all work together for the best interest. So what I'm going to try and do, I won't use the link that I built in here. I'm going to open this separately because yeah, so can you see that? It's very, very large. So, wonder, can I change that to my other screen? Elka, do you think there's a way of moving this? I'm using 2 screens. I would quite like to show this a little bit larger.
Did you only share the PowerPoint presentation, or did you share your screen? So far.
Yeah, can you? I'm not sure who can see what at this stage. Can you see the hyperlink document?
No, we are only seeing still your PowerPoint presentation.
Right. In that case, I'm going to try and use the. Okay. How do we do this thing?
Maybe if you unshare and then share again your other screen?
I'll try that, yeah, why not? Stop sharing. Now, share screen, and it should be that one. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so here is the hyperlink document that we constructed, and there are actually 24 pages in this, and the way it works is that you will see a flow through of in the green arrows is a flow of materials that move through the value chain. So you start with natural resources, that are things that come from the earth. You've got the oils, plants, minerals, etc. These are fed into the raw material manufacturers. And the way this whole hyperlink document works now is, among our members, we have a hyperlink now, so that if I click the hyperlink on this screen, that then leads to a page which shows a link to the websites of the members that are interested as stakeholders at this point in the value chain. These raw material suppliers supply acrylate, initiators, and other materials. So there's a general summary of other materials, but since we're RADCure and most of our members who are raw material suppliers or interested as stakeholders in raw materials are mostly acrylates, or in some cases cationic material manufacturers, or they're initiator manufacturers, then we've concentrated on these. And there's a link I'll demonstrate some of the links in a second, but there's links then to the acrylate makers, the photoinitiator makers, the cationic pigments, fillers, etc. And then as we move off this page between the dotted lines, we move towards the formulators. Now, even at this early stage on this first screen, what you see is that there are outside influencers who are from further down the value chain, but they have a very strong influence still over what happens in the early part of the value chain. So obviously the brand owner, because the brand owner has asked for a particular type of food packaging in this case. The brand owner typically, according to the consultations I've made, will talk to a designer. It may be the same designer they always used. And so the way that the packaging is constructed is done by formulators, and packaging houses. But it's done to a design that's dictated. So the influence here sort of follows the purple lines. And there's one chain of influence which overrides absolutely everything throughout every phase of this market value chain, and that is the regulator. And the regulator in this case, and I'm going to try a couple of these links now, you'll see that the first of these links is to the RADTECH website. We have a link to the European Commission. And if you're talking about regulators, now there's a link to ECHA, the European Chemicals Agency, which is working, yeah, there it is. And also in the UK, the Health and Safety Executive. And there are other groups like CEFIC and the CIA, for example, in Britain. And so you can follow each of these parts of the value chain. If I click on the regulators, you see that in Europe, you have the European Commission, ECHA, CEFIC, the HSE, UK regulation of hazardous substances, the Swiss ordinance, if you're talking about food packaging. Regarding Turkey, there's Turkey Reach, there's the Green Punkt and Nordic Swan, which are various symbols and devices for controlling the quality of packaging and board, for example. And then I've also put in some links to organizations outside Europe, for example, like TOSCA, the FDA, Korean Reach and China Reach. So let's go back to the map where we were. So the idea of this then is you follow each part of this downstream. So we'll click the downstream button and it takes us to the next page on, where we now look where the raw materials are being fed to the formulators. So this is, in the case of packaging, it's ink coating and adhesive formulators. There's a separate stream for equipment. And a lot of our RADTECH members manufacture the equipment, which can be fabrication equipment, it can be drying equipment. And the drying equipment, UV and EB, also influences what the formulators can do, what equipment is available, what technology is possible. Separately again, there's a substrate stream. Now, in the case of really high quality food packaging, it would be virgin wood pulp, for example. If you were talking about some complicated styles of packaging, for example, metal boxes, or even in cartons that can be plastic windows, etc. And then we have glass bottles, etc. But this is a separate substrate stream. And what's interesting as well in this is that more and more in the circular economy, we see a feeding in from the end of this value chain of waste managed products, which come back into the chain higher up. So now we have a lot more lines of influence where the equipment manufacturers will influence the coatings and adhesives formulators. The substrate manufacturers will also do that, and they will interact quite strongly. You still have the regulator who's making a lot of influence and changing and actually dictating terms. The formulator and the equipment manufacturers will feed into an area where the printers, in this case, they will then take the materials that come through. They'll take all three material flows. So you can treat those as equipment as a material, the formulation as a material, and substrate as a material. And if you click on these, what we've done is we've made links to carton board manufacturers, for example. We've made links to the people who formulate the inks and coatings. So these are people who are members and their websites will be linked into this this map. And also there's associations. So for example, RADTECH, we mentioned the UPIA, the British Printing Ink Federation, you've got the British Coatings Federation, you've got the various different associations which are involved as stakeholders in different parts of the market. And always, as we move through each phase, you have the downstream influencers. So the downstream influences, in this case, the designers, brand owners, retailers and supermarkets, they will influence the people they have contact with. It's unusual for a brand owner to lay down terms for raw material manufacturers. It does happen in food packaging. Companies like Nestle, for example, have written a very prescriptive document which actually proscribes materials and prescribes certain ways of working. So let's move down the line again, and the next part of the value chain is the fabrication and filling. So the inks and coatings that come from the formulators will now reach the printers. They will generate printed waste, which is fed back up for recycling and will go to waste management companies. They manufacture printed material. They've taken the substrates, they've taken all, the equipment. Now what they do, they're using their fabrication equipment, and now the fabricator will take the contents, whatever food it is, and they will actually finish the manufacture of the carton. And as you go further down again, you'll see that there's different groups. Pick one out here, Pro Carton, for example. Oh, their website's not working as it was. So you'll find that different active groups and associations are working with the different parts of the market. So now let's go even further, and we come to the filled cartons now being sent to retailers and brand owners. Brand owners may be the retailers. A lot of supermarkets and such like now sell their own brands. So you can click here as well, and this is an overview of the supermarket and retail chains throughout Europe, and a link to each of their websites showing exactly how they are interacting as stakeholders in our market. And this is just one application area, remember. So if we click on the brand owners, it's quite interesting. In the food packaging value chain, you can actually find that a very small number of companies control the majority of worldwide food and beverage brands. So it's actually quite a short list. When we broke this all down, there are quite a few others that are on top of this as well. There's I come across a few every day, but I have to start somewhere. And this catches, I would say, something like about 80 or 90% of the food brands that are major food brands sold through supermarkets anyway. After that, the supermarket, of course, will sell to the consumer. That's where everything goes. That's where the money's made. And although there's no sort of individual consumers you can link to, you can link to European consumer organizations. For example, the BE European Consumer Organization here. This is an umbrella group of 45 independent consumer organizations around 32 countries in Europe. So this link here will take you to 45 other websites and groupings. If we consider then in amongst this lot also designers, for example, there's actually quite a good European Brand and Packaging Design Association. It's similarly to the others where we can't specify all of the design houses that are being used. There are associations which have member pages. So if we would click on that, for example, now, hoping that it opens up relatively quickly. Yeah. So looking here, you will find a list of members of the European Brand and Packaging Design Association. So the idea of this is that we can always find the information, and it makes the whole value chain slightly more holistic for everybody to manage. And no matter where you are as a stakeholder in the value chain, you can find who is the influencer at a certain level, and you can also see the complexities associated with the market. After the consumer's finished, they'll throw out what they've got there. We have a waste management site where some of the major handlers of waste, packaging waste in Europe are connected. And this will be fed back as recycled material after being de-inked, for example, repulped, and it will be sent back to go in as a raw material again into the final, and come back into the value chain. I'm going to stop sharing there simply because I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint presentation again. If I can do that. Share the right screen again, I think. Yeah. Hopefully you see me back where I left it. So that's a brief overview, if you like, of what we're attempting to do. We're trying to make a map, which is a useful interactive map, which can be used. And we started with food packaging. We've started on a wood coatings map, which is not finished yet. We're still working on it. Now I'm struggling to move to my last slides. Excuse me, I'm going to try again. Do you see it? I hope so. Yeah. So now when we consider the markets, there's some important conclusions to draw. And I think that it's worthwhile, whatever phase of the market you're interested in, however your stakeholding is in a RADCURE market, by the end of the value chain that we just showed then with the food packaging, a finished item, a finished package may include
we now see your presenter mode, Paul.
Oh no, okay, sorry.
No worries.
I don't know how I'm doing this so badly.
No
Does that
worries.
work better?
No, if you can, do you see the display settings option again? You can switch them. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay,
yeah,
so you have back how it should be. Good. Okay, I'm a technological genius. You can tell here. I was once told never make alliances with electrical appliances. They don't respond very well. So here we go. Yeah. So when you follow through to a package, one finished package may actually have utilized over 1,500 raw materials, not necessarily only in the formulation, but in various things that have to be regulated down each of the different chains that lead towards that. So it could be in the pulp and packaging, it could be in paper making, it could be in board coatings, it could be in the machine manufacturer. And so there's big implications when you consider things like REACH, for example. It's not only the formulation that has to be regulated. And the other thing as well, I mentioned circular economy very, very briefly there, but more and more we're being encouraged to consider the use of raw materials, finished products as raw materials. So this is becoming a very strong indication for the future that one person's finished product does become a raw material for another. Hopefully there's been something useful for you in all of that, and I thank you. I open this for any questions now at this stage.
Thank you, Paul, for your presentation. So indeed, everyone, feel welcome to insert your questions in the Q&A section, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And we'll just allow a minute to see if anyone is typing a question. I'll just mention again that this webinar is being recorded, so you can always listen to it again via our website. It will become available later on today.
So I should have been slicker, really. It's been recorded. I should have found out those technical problems before.
You did a good job.
They're in permanence now. I apologize for those.
No problem. I think your presentation was very clear, Paul, because I don't see any questions popping up.
I hope it wasn't too confusing and just created more questions than are possible to answer. I'm very, very happy, by the way, to answer questions or point to other things by email. So please feel free to email. I've not put my email address on the screen, but I think Elke can let you have those. Yeah, and if you have any questions later on, indeed, feel free to send them. You can send them to mail@radtecheurope.com, and I will make sure that Paul receives the emails. Yeah. So I hope that's been useful. I make the same appeal I made earlier, that as an association, we're trying to create tools which can be useful to everybody, and by trying to put all of the different stakeholders in the value chain, link them all in one place, we feel that it should connect people better and will allow us to facilitate discussions between different parts of the value chain. I know it's something that our sister association in the USA have been trying to do recently as well, which is bring end users as part of a discussion forum panel, for example, and we've had some quite good success in some areas doing the same thing, bringing people who really do know one end and know the demands as brand owners, for example, and they can educate the people at the other end who are the raw material manufacturers, and the raw material manufacturers can pass on their challenges in the other direction. Okay. I see a question now from Mohammed. Okay. Can RIE consultants join RADTECH too? It's a very good question. I don't think we've excluded anybody, have we, in that respect? No, I think they are included in the category 5 membership. Yeah. But Mohammed, if you can send me an email, then I will look it up for you, and I can make sure that that it's right what I just said. But I think it's included in the category 5 membership. I mean, to be honest, a REACH consultant someone who has some expertise that a lot of our members may be interested in, and I think that there may be a benefit in both directions to membership. And what we've been doing recently is we've also been setting up forums, discussion forums, where we'll invite people who are not currently members to come and appear almost like expert witnesses, if you like, that can guide us and help to inform us. So I would encourage you to make contact, and perhaps as a member, or perhaps as something, as an expert separately in a specific forum that could be invited. I think you'd find some benefit.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the webinar for today. And again, many thanks to you, Paul, for presenting, and also to our audience for joining us today. And we hope to see you again at a future webinar. Have a good afternoon, everyone.
Yeah, thank you to everyone who's joined us. I appreciate that on a Friday.